Oh.
So thank you all for coming. And you guys know I'm Bull from Lingotech. I run sales in the Northeast, from basically the DC area up to Canada. The subject today is the case for multilingual, but the case is pretty obvious these days. So I really didn't think I could spend an hour talking about the why. I will talk some about the why, but then I thought you might be more interested in some of the how too, right? So the why is just basically, here's a trend from the last 20 years about how companies that have accelerated their move to digitizing all of their content for consumption have been able to outpace competitors who moved more slowly. So that's just sort of a background fact. More to the point, though, companies that make a serious commitment to localizing their content for all the markets that they're in, many of which a lot of business gets done in English, like in France or Germany or something like that. But it's been studied and it's been proven that if you present that information in people's native tongue, it does contribute to top-line growth in a measurable way if they can move through that process. And the reason is basically this, right? 87% of the market is not English-speaking, I think, or speaks English as a second language. I think that's kind of a hybrid stat. But in polling, roughly 3/4 of them say that they prefer to consume the content in their own language, and so they're far more likely to execute a conversion event, right? Buy something, fill out a form, any of those sorts of things. And for whatever reason, as digital marketing has just exploded, particularly around personalization, digitizing the translation operations kind of lagged behind in terms of the investment that companies have been making. They've been able to get by using traditional processes of emailing documents back and forth with a language services provider. But the rub is this, right? In the last, in recent years, the publishing velocity for source content has just massively, massively accelerated, and so their traditional processes are falling down. I mean, this is a stat that always sort of makes me, I mean, you think about everything that's happened since the 90s in terms of all of the digital content, but that's a real stat, or it was, as of last year. It's just accelerating so fast. Smartphones, cameras, it's incredible how much more rapidly content is getting created now. This is the traditional way. This is the processes that people were using, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. And don't worry, I'm not going to read through all these boxes at 4:30 in the afternoon. But it's some combination of identifying what needs to be translated in some system, whether it's Drupal or some other system, extracting that from the site, packaging it up, emailing it or FTPing it to some translation agency, not having any visibility into the process or any ability to participate in the process, and then getting a bunch of stuff back that's in Swahili and Russian and Mandarin, and having to get it back into the website, only you don't speak those languages, so you're copying and pasting, and there are mistakes, and you have to, it's just, it's a nightmare. So the better approach is to basically integrate the process directly into places that content lives, and that starts with moving everything to the cloud, right? Finding a content or a translation management system that you like that's cloud-based, that has connectors into the various places like Drupal and Marketo and Salesforce and Zendesk, whatever, all the different things that companies use, so that everybody involved in the process, wherever they are in the world, the translation agency, the internal project managers, the partner people running the project, they all have access to the same set of things, and they don't have to work sequentially, right? They can all work, at the same time. So the new paradigm looks sort of like this. Drupal website, say there on the left where it says enterprise applications. New content gets introduced to the website. It's detected immediately. It's fired up to the Lingotech TMS, where it goes through any translation workflow that you've set up, and there are myriad ones that you can set up. But usually it's a combination of applying previous translations from translation memory database, having a human translator, one of ours or from some other agency, do the translation. Second linguist does the review. The glossary, the terminology database is applied to make sure that nothing's mistranslated, and important terms are consistently translated. And then when it's finished, it comes right back down to the Drupal instance and any other places it needs to be deployed. All of the markup gets rewrapped around it, and it gets inserted directly where it goes. And if you want, you can even check a box within the Lingotech Drupal module and have the content deploy automatically. Most folks like to see it there and then look at it in context. Lots of times they have Lingotech set up in their stage environment so that they can review everything even after it's translated and then push it live. Question?
What do you do by doing it that way? How do you take care of things like character count problems and any of the other more layout-driven issues with different, languages?
Sure. Well, within the cloud-based platform, the Lingotech platform that the translators are using to translate and review, there's an in-context review tool so that they can see exactly what it looks like on the page that it came from, and they can even edit within that. And so you run into these problems like with German, with these massive complex nouns, that are screwing up buttons and everything. That's where they discover those and fix those.
Okay, cool.
And there's a messaging system within the system where they can, you'd be able to fire off a note to the person on the customer end, in Germany and say, look, there's this problem with this button. Here are the alternative labels that our linguist is recommending that are short enough.
What would you suggest?
Which would you suggest? And so things like that get discovered along the way.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Sure. And then the other sort of big aha thing to this approach is, in addition to using automation, as we looked at here, connect the system up to all of the other places within your digital ecosystem where that content needs to be deployed. And what that does is it enables you to save money. Traditionally, different systems are used by different departments within a large enterprise, and they're all buying their own translation in silos, out of their own budgets, and so there's a lot of redundant spending. But if there's a centralized hub where all of the translation memories live, and it's connected to all of the places that the content needs to be deployed, you can share translations across different things. Something that's on the website could very well be verbatim be in a Marketo campaign as part of the sort of about media current thing at the bottom of whatever. So share the content. And the other thing is that improves speed and consistency, because over time you have to translate fewer and fewer actual words, because an increasing percentage of what you send up to the system is finding a match in the translation memory database, and that's just getting applied. And the other benefit is voice consistency, right? You're speaking in exactly the same tone and style across your Marketo campaigns as you are on the website. So that's important too. This is basically about that too. Put everything in the middle and then aggregate it, syndicate it across all of the systems where it needs to reside within the company's ecosystem. So what are some advantages of doing it that way versus doing it the traditional way? If you're doing it that way, it's online, it's secure, things are happening in parallel. For example, a reviewer doesn't have to wait until a document's been completely translated before getting the document and starting reviewing it. As soon as someone starts translating the document, the output of that is trickling into the reviewer's workflow, and the reviewer can start reviewing before the document's finished. So it's faster, it's continuous. It's basically the difference between a project-based paradigm for translation and a continuous global publishing model, which is really what's needed. The business outcomes that you're driving, as those stats showed, an improved CX customer experience results in top-line revenue growth. We know that. You're avoiding redundant cost. You're able to govern all of the content in a global fashion. So there are just myriad ways that it's more effective and more useful, not just speed and voice consistency. Any questions about any of that? No? It's thrilling, isn't it? You'll enjoy this more. Accuracy is incredibly important. If it's worse than not translating at all if you translate poorly, because you damage the brand in the market you're translating for. So, are you familiar with the hashtag translation fails? There's a hashtag where people tag funny examples that they find, and you can go and you can find the ones where it's from some other language into English, because we read English. So last night I found a few that I thought were kind of hilarious. I thought I'd share. Like that's, I think that's supposed to mean, you know, a racetrack, something like that, right? That's a legit road sign. Look at this one. This one is just unbelievable, I think. I mean, come on. And that actually, you know, that's a product in a store. So it made it through whatever, you know, quality control process happened, and that's what it ended up being. Yeah, this one, I mean, what does, I don't even know what that kind of store would be, but someone thought that slavery was the appropriate translation. This one is really weird. Look at some of these things. Old people wang is auspicious. Liquid the male scholar is nursed. Liquid the lady is nursed. Condom. I mean,
what were they trying? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, instant noodles is at the top, so I think it's food.
No. Actually, this is a Chinese hotel, and sometimes you check in certain hotels. They call you within 10 minutes and basically ask you, would you like some additional services? So
interesting.
So the bottom of this actually makes perfect sense.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
But other parts, it is.
Maybe those are spa treatments. Those noodles. Liquid the lady is nursed.
I don't know if we want to know the actual. I think we might be getting a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of services are we talking about?
Unlearn some of this.
Or unsee it, right? Yeah. Anyway, I thought these were amusing. These are examples of you know why that's bad. Here's the last one. So, there are tools to use to prevent doing this. So, I mean, I've just spent making the case for translation, but there's also a case to be made for the dangers of doing it badly, right?
This might be a case for maybe you shouldn't be too accurate in your translation. We're not sure.
Well, yeah, one or the other. One or the other is true.
Well, it's interesting because the first half of it is actually it's a direct sound translation because the first two characters is hella and hella tong, you know, so it's
right.
Hella soup. But then I actually have to admit, I don't know this.
pretty funny, and it's just hours of fun. If you go to that on Twitter every day, there are incredible examples. There are some that were just way too racy to even include in this.
But you can send us links later.
Okay, absolutely. So how do you manage that? There are several ways. One way is just some best practices like this that existed even before technology, but when you're starting work on a new project for translation, one of the first steps is to develop a glossary. Some people call it a terminology database, but basically go through the content. We have some ways at Lingotech, and I'm sure other companies do, to programmatically identify repeated nouns and terms and things that seem like taglines. It's an iterative process with the customer where you then go back and say, we think this is the key stuff. Here's how we would suggest translating it, but you know, I'm sure we're wrong on some of this, and so you need to ask one of your language speakers how we should translate, transmission or some term that's really granularly specific to what it is that they do. So there's a process there of developing a glossary, but if you have technology that you can then use to enforce the glossary, you can make sure that some of those mistakes we just saw don't happen. Style guides is another thing that is typically done by the translation agency to just create a tone and a style that's consistent. I mean, brands have a way that they talk to their customers. We know this from the English, right? And it's the same in any other language.
So wait, are you suggesting customized style guides per language?
Yes. Yeah, well, you develop one in English.
Well, yeah,
and
no,
then,
we've done those. I've done a few, but
right.
we need different voicing tones per language.
Yeah. It's interesting. And then the third thing, obviously, record everything that gets translated so it can be reused. That keeps the voice consistency, and it also makes it less and less expensive. Another thing that's important is, make sure that you select quality linguists, or that the company that you're using for translation has linguists. Something we all hate to do is translation tests, because without having done these steps first, the chances are the translation is not going to be that accurate. But nonetheless, sometimes they still require tests. So we have all these caveats that we provide that sound very defensive, but they're true. but make sure that the people that they're selecting are, you know, accredited by the various standards of international translation and stuff like that. Needs to be very good translators, and there needs to be a good process for managing them, which a technology-driven process will really help with. Another thing that you can use technology for is programmatical quality checks. I mean, ultimately, quality it has to be reviewed by a person, but many things get caught through technology-driven things. You know, if there are repeated words, if there are inconsistencies where the same source content has different translations, you can find those things using the technology. You can find out if there are dates that are not consistently stated. You know, like in Europe, you'd say 19 November, and here you'd say November 19th. Make a decision in the style guide about which way you're going to articulate things like that, and then make sure it's consistent. And if you don't, you can catch those things using technology. Here's another one. You know, just it's basically a way to bubble up potential problems, and then a human translator looks at them. If they're missing or different tags, things of that nature. Same thing, if the target's way longer or shorter than the source, or longer than a specified number of characters, it's going to blow out a button like we were talking about. Missing tags, different tags. I'm not going to go through all this stuff, but there are some quality control checks or checks in a good translation management system that will eliminate the need for the reviewers. By the time it gets to a reviewer, which costs money, there are far fewer things for them to catch and fix. So spelling, grammar, that sort of stuff as well.
Repeating paragraphs.
Sorry?
Repeating paragraphs.
Just things like that you don't need a human to catch. And so this is a screenshot of our CAD Tool and some of the functionality at the bottom that works through some of that stuff. So, I mean, I'm already getting towards the end, so hopefully you guys have some questions. Not that we have to sit in here until the stroke of 5, but just some of the things that I've talked about, right? Localization is personalization. And so I talk to a lot of prospective customers, and I always get them to lay out all of the other things that they're doing with personalization. Are they doing multivariate testing engines? You go to any e-commerce site and click a link and just watch the system tray and watch all the calls going out to external SaaS products that are so that the page you're seeing, it knows if you've been there before, have you ever bought something from there, what was your dwell time the last time you were there, what website did you come from, when you left last time, where did you go, was it a competitor? All that goes into what they're showing. Nothing's more personal than localization. Nothing's more important than that. So when you're talking to them and you're trying to articulate best practices about personalization and about just general web strategy, get localization into the conversation, unless it's not a multilingual website. But if they are saying we want to do it because we have customers in Japan or something, make sure that they're thinking about localization in just the same way they're talking about personalized dynamic content. Lots of times it gets overlooked. Again, because of how fast content is being published and created in whatever the source language or languages you really need to automate all of those macro steps in the process so that people aren't just bogged down with endless llama-like trips between one system to another. Make sure that humans are focused on quality, not manual, mindless steps. Another thing that does, because that's so flippin' boring, is it introduces mistakes, because people will start thinking about, something else. And so that's important. Content syndication is very important. It's not a new concept if you just think about sites that you build in English where the content gets syndicated in other systems, but do that in a multilingual way, because since you have to pay to translate, there's a lot of money and time to be saved in the process. As we reviewed with some of those examples, it's worse than not localizing at all if you do it in a very amateurish way. The case for translating for all of the markets that a customer is in is obvious. The metrics, the data clearly indicate that the site is going to be, consumed. It's going to be more effective with the audience. But the reciprocal is that if you're ham-handed about it and you just blast out, for example, if you just horribly machine translated the whole site and sent it out, that would be even worse than not localizing at all. And finally, the consistent generating of high quality involves a combination of those digital assets, glossaries, style guides, and translation memories, best practices about how to go about an implementation, and then take advantage of the technology tools that are out there. They are super helpful. The quality check stuff is very, very easy way to eliminate 2/3 of the mistakes that the person doing the review is going to find. There's not a period at the end of the sentence. You don't need to be paying some translator, whatever they get, $175 an hour or something, to go through and fix those things. So that's important as well. And that's basically the content. So, I was hoping that there'd be a room full of people working on projects, and we would have, 20 minutes of Q&A or anything. I'm happy to answer any questions that you do have, but if not, I think that's about it.
Can you send me your deck? I would love to review some of those stats.
Should I do that, or should I send you a link? Oh, you're talking the stats. I thought you meant the translation fails.
No. If you want to send me the link to the translation, I personally I'd like that, but professionally I'm really interested in the statistics you put.
Sure, absolutely. The ones at the top. Be happy to. Give me your card or whatever, or I can just write down your name. Perfect.
I have come prepared. I'll run up and bring them this time.
Awesome. Thank you. Do you guys want the stuff too, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you export to a PDF and then upload it, or?
Yeah, well, they actually.
I think some of the other presenters, that's what they were doing. So.
I can happily do that. I think
But
Steven
whatever
said.
he sends to me, I can send over to you too, so that way you're
Sure,
not
I'm
like
just speaking on behalf of everyone.
Yeah, that's good.
making assumptions.
They have recorded this, and we'll make the presentation
Right,
available.
yeah.
Oh yeah, is the red button still pushed?
It is. But I guess we're about done. Yeah.
This is interesting.
Quick,
Cool.
everybody.
Applaud.
Applaud violin.